Hi, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are now in the stream. Today, as North Africa begins to rebuild following the revolutions of the Arab Spring, why are people turning to Islamist parties for change? Our digital producer, Ahmed Shahab El-Din, is here looking out for your live feedback. As always, tweet him using the hashtag AJStream. Joining him on the couch today is Olivier Roy, professor at the European University Institute in Florence, Italy. And next to him is Brian Katulis, senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Great to have the both of you here. If I could get each of your take in a nutshell, what's your initial impression of the success of Islamist parties in Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco?
I think that the Islamist parties are now formatted by democracy. They are not imposing their ideology. They are taken by the political process, and slowly they are becoming actors of a democratic change.
Okay, and you, Brian?
I think it's like watching gravity take place. I've lived in many of these places. Islamism was quite popular, and once you open up these political systems, they will do well. I think the key question is how will they govern and how will they change as they govern?
Interesting. I think the gravity metaphor is quite intriguing. I'm trying to imagine what the no gravity lifestyle must have been like. We're going to get deeper into this. And of course, this show, as always, is about our community. So if you've got a story you want to share, tweet it to us using the hashtag AJStream. Before we dive into our main discussion, here's Ahmed with some of your feedback.
Seems designs for two luxury residential towers in South Korea have sparked instant controversy across the world. This is because they bear a striking resemblance to the disturbing images of the World Trade Center towers exploding in New York City on September 11th, 10 years ago. Now, the towers, which include a so-called cloud feature that connects them around the 27th floor, are set to be built in 2016 at the entrance of Seoul's newly developed Yongsan Business District. Now, online, many have questioned whether the resemblance was intentional or not. On Twitter, Jody Applegate asks, does this building look like 9/11? Did the designers do it on purpose? And then writes, the Twin Towers feature an eerie cloud. Well, the Dutch architecture firm responsible for the design, MVRDV, has received a lot of criticism of late. The company has publicly apologized for having potentially offended anyone. They posted this message on their Facebook wall. It says, in yellow, down at the bottom, MVRDV regrets deeply any connotations the cloud project evokes regarding 9/11. It was not our intention. The cloud was designed based on parameters such as sunlight, outside spaces, living quality for inhabitants, and the city. Still, there are some who like the design. Dreaming Pop tweets from Korea saying, right here, we translated it for you, the cloud. People say the Yongsan residential towers resemble the World Trade Center towers collapsing during 9/11. So I took a look. It looks cool in my opinion, they write. Since there seems to be controversy about it abroad, I guess there will be a lot of interest regarding Yongsan. Well, here is something else that there might be a lot of interest about. Here at Al Jazeera, we are always trying to offer you new ways to access our content. We now have a new web app in the Google Chrome web store that allows you to watch us in high definition, 24 hours a day, through the web on Google TV. The application allows you to browse the best of Al Jazeera's news analysis and programs, where you can subscribe to your favorite news topics, receive breaking news alerts, and even access some of our content offline. Now remember, if you want to suggest a story to us here at the stream, tweet it to us using the hashtag AJStream.
I'm Josh Rushing. I'm the presenter of Fault Lines on Al Jazeera English, and you can find me on Twitter at Josh Rushing, and I'm in the stream.
As many in the Middle East continue to be swept up in political uprisings, North Africans have entered a new phase of their Arab awakening. With that new phase comes a trend in every country that's held elections to form a new government. Islamist parties have come out on top. In Tunisia, it was the moderate Ennahda party. In Morocco, it was the Justice and Development Party. And most recently in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood is set to gain the largest bloc, winning 36% of the vote in the first phase of parliamentary elections. The hardline Salafist Al-Nur party came in second place with 25%. Let's take a look at some footage from Egypt now. People have come out in large numbers to cast their ballots in what for many was the first election following decades under one leader. But why vote for the Islamists time and time again? And what is taking shape now across the Middle East. Joining us via Skype to discuss this is Sondos Asem, social media editor at Ikhwan Web, the Muslim Brotherhood's official English website. Sondos, welcome to the stream.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So let's open with the first question. What do you believe is at the root of the success of Islamist parties in these recent elections?
I think there are several reasons. I'm not surprised by the success to start with. There are several reasons that led to this electoral success. First is the actual existence of those Islamic political parties, especially the Muslim Brotherhood, for decades during the previous regimes, and the services that they have been offering to Egyptians, and the grassroots support that they have due to their social activities, and also due to their being active in civil society and non-governmental institutions. They have been there in professional syndicates, for example, in associations, in youth groups, and not just in parliament. And the second cause is the religious dimension. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt represent the moderate religious understanding of Islam, which is opposed to more hardline political groups. So it represents the religious background of the mainstream Muslims in Egypt, and that's why it enjoys popularity. And normally the people would vote for the more moderate political groups that are both pragmatic and also experienced in both in civil society and in politics.
Now, let me ask you a question on that front, actually, with regard to the moderacy, because as we mentioned, the Al-Noor party, which is much more hardline, also came up with 25% of the vote. So what do you think is underpinning their concurrent success with yours?
Well, I believe their success, for me, it's surprising because this is their first ever political experience. However, it's worth studying because the Salafists, they have been there also during previous regimes. However, they did not endorse political participation, and many of them considered opposing the regime or taking part in politics as religiously forbidden. So it's very interesting that they decided to take part in politics, to have their own political parties, and to try to be engaged in politics, which is, in my opinion, it's very positive and healthy because it encourages more pragmatism and moderation in their own thinking. I believe the Salafists also enjoy some popular support in the Egyptian streets because they have been allowed during the previous regime to preach freely in mosques, and also they have been allowed to have their licensed satellite channels where they reached out to millions of Egyptians who have been attracted to such religious discourse in the absence of other religious channels that were not actually allowed by the previous regime.
Well, so on that topic of discourse, actually, we're getting a lot of feedback from our online community, so I want to bring them in.
Well, you know, it's interesting because here we are discussing the rise of political Islam, but a lot of people take issue with the actual term Islamist and what does it mean. We have Muhammad Karim on Twitter saying, Islamist movements were historically repressed and hence often engaged in violent resistance. The West assumes this will continue even after the Arab uprisings. And Nada Salim Adamji saying on Twitter, misinterpretation isn't just in the West of what Islamists are. Many in the Muslim world also distrust Islamist parties. Most are in the news for wrong reasons. And you know, Professor, I'd ask you, a lot of the Islamists themselves feel as though they have, you know, a bad image because of the decades of suppression. And they claim that some of the prior regimes were using this fear of Islamism or, you know, these political Islamist parties in order to stay in power. What do you make of this term Islamist, and what does it really mean in Egypt and Morocco?
The term is usually used to qualify parties who are devising an Islamic ideology and who claim that through this Islamic ideology it is possible to build a true Islamic state which never existed after the time of the Prophet.
Right.
So it's a very ideologically loaded term, Islamism. But the Islamist parties, they have an history, you know. The Muslim Brothers have been founded now almost 80 years ago. So they have an history, they have changed, they have experienced repression, participation, elimination sometimes. And now we have a new generation who is far more, I would say, tempted by democratization because first, it's their interest. You know. When there is a wave of democratization, as now, they win. They win the vote, you know. And I don't think that we can put into question the electoral victory of the Nahda in Tunisia.
But you know, historically in Palestine, for example, when Hamas won the vote, which is, you know, its origins come from the Muslim Brotherhood, many in the West did question that election. So who's to say that they won't again?
Hamas was elected, you know, won the election on a nationalist program more than an Islamist program.
Right.
And now the Islamist parties are winning the election on a democratization program. So it's a bit different, you know. It's not a situation of conflict. You know, Tunisia, you don't have any conflict, any international conflict in Tunisia. So it's really a matter of how will the people to be ruled, to be governed, and to rule itself. So it's a call for democratization. And even in the Islamist parties, you have many conservative leaders who don't consider that democracy is an end in itself. They have, in fact, to adapt to this demand of democratization, and they are doing quite well until now.
So let's actually dive deeper into this issue of democratization, because there have been some allegations of voter fraud that have been raised. Some are calling into question the legitimacy of the Egyptian vote in particular. As we can see in this video, it seems that, which actually we cannot independently verify the video, but it appears to depict a chaotic scene with ballots strewn on the ground. In the footage, people can be overheard making accusations that voting was rigged in favor of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, Morocco's vote has also been criticized because of their extremely low turnout, with only 45% of registered voters taking part. Many in that country believe King Mohammed VI's reforms are only window dressing and that he still holds all power. And actually, let's come back to you on this. What exactly do you believe would be or how do you respond to these allegations that the votes were rigged in favor of the Brotherhood? Sondos.
Of course, I disagree with that, and I don't think there are any evidence of such vote rigging, although there were many irregularities and violations of the elections law. However, the main feature of these elections are that they were characterized by very high voter turnout, and also they were free. Everyone have acknowledged that these elections have been free, and there were no reports that there was any kind of vote rigging. And even the very high voter turnout, which was above 60%, is actually a proof of the legitimacy of such elections. And I don't know what happened in the other places. I believe also in Tunisia, the vote was very free. And actually, I believe that even the results of such a vote have indicated that there was no favoring of one political group over another.
So let me actually jump in and give Brian an opportunity to speak there, because I mean, so she's arguing that, well, the high turnout represents a real mandate perhaps for the Muslim Brotherhood, but some are questioning the legitimacy of the vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime there's a major political transition, you'll have parties question the legitimacy of any vote. And I've seen this in many countries, Afghanistan, Palestine, early elections, and things like this. Look, I would be surprised if there was no fraud in any of these elections, because we have fraud in our system, in Chicago, in the 2000 presidential election. The question is it the scale of fraud that could actually change the results? And here, it seems that the Muslim Brotherhood, all of the Islamist parties have done so well that it would seem to be a very massive fraudulent exercise, and I don't think it is, if they had done so well. So it seems to me that people may have some criticisms about some ballots and things like this, But I would be surprised if the overall legitimacy of the elections, as we're seeing in Russia right now, by contrast, is being seriously questioned by a lot of people. You don't see that turnout in massive protests in Egypt and Tunisia and other places. There's a general agreement that these results generally have some sort of credibility and acceptability.
Talk to us a little bit about the perception. When we were talking about Islamist parties, is there a different perception in the way people in the West speak about this and what people in Islamic countries understand?
Well, I think so. I mean, I lived in the Muslim world, many Muslim majority countries for a long period of time, and I think we need to be careful about sort of the definitions that we use, and I think the professor had some really good definitions for us to look at. And we really need to make a distinction, because one of the guys on Twitter talked about the confusion about violence. And this is even in your question about Hamas. That was one thing that was different about Hamas, and is different, is that they've killed other Palestinians and they've killed Israelis. I don't see Muslim Brotherhood members in Egypt or in Tunisia, Islamists, who are engaging in that sort of broad-scale violence. It's a different context because they have occupation and there's a conflict that's going on there. So we need to be very careful about these definitions. And my main thing is, look, we've learned to live with political Islam in Turkey, in Iraq, and a number of other places. And the West, I think, is going to slowly have to learn to live with a political Islam in many different forms. And the last thing I would say is that the more that Islamists engage in a democratic process, the more they become like other political parties. They will fight other issues along these lines, and they're malleable. They're not, I think they're open to sort of discourse, which I think is the most important thing to remember.
Professor Roy?
Yeah, I think there is a mistake in the West, is to think that democratization has a prerequisite, which is secularization. The idea that the Arab and Muslim societies should be secularized at first, and then democracy will be possible. Another idea is that there should be some sort of a religious reform, a theological reform of Islam, in order to allow Islamists to be Democrats. But I think it doesn't make sense. The Puritans who founded the American democracy were not liberals, and they may be, but probably they were Democrats in some sort of a way too. So the problem is the conception of religion, the conception of the role of religion. And what we see now among the new generations of Muslims is a more open vision of perception of religion, more diversity, more religious diversity, with girls wearing a headscarf and girls without headscarf. You have different conception of what Islam means. You have a debate on Islam, and it has nothing to do with theological liberalization. It has to do with a conception of a more open and diverse society. And I think that it's something which is now in the mind of the new generation. Yeah.
Well,
but of course, we have many conservative quarters who don't follow that.
Well, I think it's fascinating when you juxtapose it to the American election. I think it would be very intriguing when you look at the American, some degree of discomfort with the rise of Islamist parties. But if you were to have an American president stand up and say, I stand up for secular values and I'm running for president and I will not be discussing my own religious perspective, you could virtually guarantee that that person would not be elected in this country.
Yeah, it's a very religious society here in the United States. But the interesting thing about the Middle East, the thing that I think is interesting, is parties like the party that Sondos is a part of. Not only how are they going to change their own countries, but what role would this new Islamism have in places like Doha, in Riyadh, and in other places that have not opened up, that are still very autocratic and dictatorial to a certain extent? And will this new form of Islamism that we see in Tunisia, in Turkey, perhaps in Egypt right now, actually impact those societies that are much more traditional?
Well, I want to get our audience involved, but first I want to give Sondos an opportunity to respond. Sondos, do you believe that what's happening in North Africa will have an impact in other nations, like in the Gulf and Saudi Arabia?
Well, probably. I think the Arab Spring has proved to have a domino effect, and I think this wave of democratization will go to other places.
Ahmed.
Well, Sondos, speaking about the Muslim Brotherhood, it's important, I think, to look at why they came to power and why they had so much support. Aside from the fact that they have been oppressed and repressed for so long, we have Mika on Twitter saying, what appeals to the poor is food handouts and social programs, which Ikhwan have done. Ideology of secularism doesn't feed a family. So to your point, raising the issue that it's because of their social programs the Muslim Brotherhood has come to power. Now, looking forward, we have a question on that same topic that came in from Misha herself in New York. Let's take a listen in.
I know that the Muslim Brotherhood is well known for providing much needed aid and services to its own people in Egypt. And so my question is whether there's a possibility that the current goals and the political agenda of the Islamic parties in both Egypt and Tunisia could possibly be not the radical Islamification of their societies, but instead a country that's finally run on positive Islamic values that would value its own people much more than it values the West.
Thoughts, Brian?
Well, that's what we call a leading question, and I think her question leads us to a certain answer that it's possible. But I think the real tough job will be when the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt or other places really come to power, and then they're responsible for creating jobs in a very difficult economic situation. I think this is where the ideology and their social programs will really be put to test.
Will they be able to maintain those social programs across the nationwide?
Right, exactly, and that's one question maybe Sondos can answer, because what we've seen, the results of Islamist parties around the world, is quite mixed. It's just like every other political party around the world. Sometimes they do fairly well in places like Turkey. You see Turkey has doubled its GDP in the last decade. You see in other places like the Gaza Strip, it's an awful situation for a number of reasons there, but they just simply have not delivered.
Right.
So actually this brings up an interesting point. We got this tweet from @Arazek1 who says, "You missed a crucial point. North Africans are very poor. Religion is seen as a refuge. The Salafis have done very well in illiterate areas of Egypt." Sondos, in your experience, does this ring true?
Well, I think the religious motivation has been very important in these elections, but it's not the key voting motivation. I believe that the people in Egypt, both the poor and the rich, have actually voted either for Salafists or for the Muslim Brotherhood because of their belief that they might be able, by their organizational abilities, to address the real issues of the Egyptian people. And concerning the previous question about providing aid and social services to Egyptians, as one reason for the popularity of the Brotherhood, I think actually the Freedom and Justice Party has defined as its three key priorities is fixing the economy, security, and eliminating corruption. Its priority is not the Islamification of Egypt or imposing any kind of religious values. So the question of having strong and efficient economic programs is very, very important for Egyptians, and that is the focus of the Freedom and Justice Party, and that is why the people voted for it, because it made it very clear that its priority is creating jobs and fixing the deteriorating economic and security conditions.
Sondos, you focused on domestic issues, but let me ask you about foreign policy. How will your success impact the relationship between Egypt and Israel?
I think the transformation in Egypt will result in very healthy relations between Egypt and the whole world. Foreign policy will be much more stronger, and Egypt will have a more influential and leading role both in the region and in the world. In the Freedom and Justice Party, we are seeking healthy relations and relations that are based on mutual interest and mutual respect with the whole world. Okay,
an excellent point, and I think that on that note, we're coming to the close of the main broadcast portion of the show. Let's leave people with a final thought from our community, which we can take into the post-show.
Well, this is actually on the issue of Morocco, which we touched on, but someone just making the point, Hamza on Twitter, saying that the Islamist Party was voted in Morocco because, unlike Tunisia and Egypt, which had higher voter turnout, less than 50% of registered Moroccans voted. Now, I think it was about 40% voter turnout. So perhaps, I don't know, any quick thoughts thoughts on the
Well,
Morocco?
unfortunately, we don't have
Running out of
time
time.
for thoughts
Fantastic.
in the main show, but we're going to take this into the post-show. Sondos, we're going to ask you to stay with us. Professor Roy, Brian, thank you so much for being with us. I want to interrogate some of the points regarding the possible relationship with Israel and other countries as well. Ahmed, great job getting the community involved. Thank you, our community, as always. On Tuesday, we're going to look at how social media is galvanizing both pro and anti-Putin protests across Russia. Stay with us at stream.aljazeera.com. Hi, welcome to the Post Show. We're going to continue our conversation on what is happening in North Africa with the recent successes of Islamist-leaning parties. And before we come back to Sondos, I want to actually take you to the point that she made regarding the probability that, or the aspiration that Egypt will maintain good relations with the rest of the world. Professor Roy, the Israelis have been making sounds of concern, let's say, since the start of the Arab awakening earlier in the year. Do they have reason to be concerned by the success of these parties?
Not really, you know. The events in the Middle East were not driven by foreign policy. So it was not an issue. Israel was not an issue during the demonstrations. And even if the Muslim brothers do lead the foreign policy of Egypt, they will have to respect red lines, you know. And one of the big red line is the peace treaty with Israel. They will not abrogate the treaty. They will keep the treaty. Of course, they will ask for some amendments, some corrections, and the relationship will probably not be friendly with Israel. But in terms of security, Muslim government in Egypt is not a threat for Israel.
Okay, now Brian, on that same tip, we saw this summer a clash between the two countries, a diplomatic tip, after you had Israeli soldiers actually kill some Egyptian soldiers as they were seeking Palestinian militants that were crossing over from Gaza. Is it possible that with these kinds of tensions and potentially with a less friendly relationship that it could change or at least lead to a change in policy?
Look, these sorts of tensions and incidents are likely to happen again, but the real question is, will it change the strategic balance of power in the region? And the answer is no. Israel has defeated Egypt many times militarily. It has a qualitative military edge. Whoever comes to power in Egypt understands that most of their problems are internal and that pragmatically they're going to need to reemerge as a leader in the region. And I would be very surprised if you see a major alteration in that. I think within Israel, certainly there are some concerns. What's interesting to me is that you've got conservatives in Israel who, and defined conservative is somebody who does not like change. There are more progressives in Israel who understand that the region is changing because of social, political, and economic dynamics. And I think right now you've got a very conservative government in Israel. They voice some of these concerns about how they can control the situation. But again, Israel is not one broad swath. It's certainly ruled by a conservative government, but there are a lot of progressives in Israel that I talk to who welcome and understand the changes that are coming about in the Middle East.
All right, Ahmed.
What about the issues of civil liberties? I mean, we touched on it a little bit, and I'd love to get Sundus's thoughts. We have a tweet from Ali Glenesk saying, citing an article in Al-Masr al-Yawm in Egypt where the Salafi party Al-Nur says, "We will not force women to wear headscarves." There's been a lot of debate as to, you know, what role these Islamist parties or the Muslim Brotherhood specifically might have on daily life, you know, the role of women in society. Sundus, what do you make of that specifically in terms of the Muslim Brotherhood coming to power? I know that there's a minority Christian representation in the party and also some women, but what do you think? Do you think that there's a guarantee that the women and other civil liberties will not be infringed on?
I am absolutely confident that civil liberties will be respected by any upcoming government, particularly if these governments have a majority or a significant representation by the Muslim Brotherhood or the Freedom and Justice Party. I strongly believe that civil liberties and freedom in general are an integral part of the program of the Freedom and Justice Party. The first chapter of the party is about freedoms. So I think the fears of violating freedoms in Egypt is actually exaggerated, and I think what Salafists have said is it's positive, and I hope this will be our way of dealing with liberties in the after the elections. And actually, I think liberties particularly is what should be the main principle that any upcoming government should abide by, because this what has been actually violated by the previous regime. We have suffered for decades of repression and restricting our freedoms. So I think any upcoming government, whether Islamists or seculars, will try to preserve freedoms and to respect civil liberties. No one will be forced to adopt any kind of lifestyle. No one will be forced to have any kind of dress code. And I assure you that the Freedom and Justice Party is very, very abiding by freedoms and civil liberties, and will respect them.
Sondos, let me press you a little bit on that, because there have been violent clashes in Egypt, particularly clashes that have involved the Coptic community. There have been allegations of violence perpetrated by members of the Salafist community. And as we see the success of the Salafists in the parliamentary elections thus far, would Copts not have reason for concern, given that there is a history of violence there?
I think any kind of violence that has been committed either during Mubarak regime or in this transitional period has been by the ruling authorities, the security apparatus, and the Egyptian military, not any Egyptians. I don't think that Salafists have actually committed violence during the clashes against Christians. What has been very clear is that it was a clash between the military security forces and on the other hand, some Coptic protesters who were protesting peacefully, demanding for legitimate rights, and they were met with very violent crackdown by the military. It was not a clash between Muslims and Christians. I believe that Egyptians by nature are very tolerant to each other. Muslims and Copts enjoy healthy relations, and the reason for any kind of tension or sectarian strife that ever happened in the past couple of decades, in my opinion, has been the repressive regime that has violated the rights of Christians and marginalized them, just as it marginalized all the citizens that have been seeking any legitimate rights.
Let me get a response here, Professor Roy. Let's begin with you. I mean, she's saying that the old regime and the military establishment is to blame for any violence, but is there no verity or value in the concerns that have been raised by Coptic Christians in Egypt, that there are actual fellow Egyptians who do not respect their rights?
There are two views. As far as the Muslim brothers are concerned, I have no doubt that they will ensure, freedom of religion for the Copts, but on the basis of minority rights, not necessarily on the basis of individual freedom of religion. Mm-hmm. So the big debate will not be about the right to be Christians, but the debate will be about the right to convert, mm-hmm. Not only from Christianity to Islam, but also from Islam to Christianity. And here the Salafis are very opposed, to giving up the concept of apostasy in favor of freedom of religion.
Okay, and Brian?
Yeah, and this is a feature we see in other places I've studied, including Pakistan, where people have been sentenced to death for conversion. And it's these sorts of things where there is a lack of respect for the basic universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we should be aware of this. And this should be the thing that the international community looks at. We shouldn't prejudge any Islamist party that comes to power, mm-hmm. but if they demonstrate through their record that they're going to commit to those basic principles that a whole community of nations signed to decades ago, then I think we should actually open up our minds to the notion that Islamists are going to engage in democracy. But let's be clear about our definitions of what those basic rights and democracy really are.
Okay, well, on that note, I want to thank you, Sondos, for joining us live from Egypt. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ahmed, I know that there's some other stories that we've been following. Can you give us a quick rundown?
Yeah, sure. Well, our lead section is meant to share some of the other stories we're following here at the stream. And the first one comes from the US, where a company called LightSquared and the co-founder of Skype have announced plans to provide free wireless internet to all Americans. Now, the initiative, which emphasizes the idea that the internet is a right rather than a privilege, will start by targeting rural and poor areas of the United States where internet access is scarce. But the plan is not without controversy. Recently leaked US government reports show that LightSquared's 4G network interferes with signals of a number of different GPS devices. Now, our second lead comes from the US as well, where a report by the Los Angeles Times has revealed that a Predator drone, most known for its use by the US military, assisted in the arrest of an American citizen back in June. A sheriff in North Dakota called for the drone to search for 3 criminal suspects thought to be roaming a 3,000-acre farm. And this is the first time that it's been reported that a drone is being used in the domestic arrest of a US citizen. Now, Congress approved the purchase of drones to patrol the country's borders in 2005. We also covered this story on our show last Thursday, so check out our site to watch the full conversation. Those are our leads. If you want to find out more about them, you could visit us at stream.aljazeera.com/leads. Cast your vote for the stories you're interested in, and tell us what you want to see on an upcoming show. Derek?
I did not know they were using drones domestically. I heard a weird buzzing over my place this weekend. I was like, is that a... Nah.
No. These are slightly larger drones as well, the Predator
Okay, that
drones.
makes me feel much
But quiet.
safer.
They're quiet.
We'll see. Anyway, thank you so much, Professor Roy. Brian, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been enlightening. And thank you, Ahmed, once again for plugging our community in, as always. And thank you for being with us today. Remember, you can check out more about this story on our website at stream.aljazeera.com. There's a lot of conversation going on my tweet deck as we speak, so search for the hashtag AJStream, use it, and join the conversation. As always, we will see you online.